this is the Fuse ServiceWorks workshop, and I'm Kenny Peeples, JBoss Technology Evangelist for middleware. I work with Fuse ServiceWorks and data virtualization, sometimes with AMQ and Fuse, with Christina Lynn, who has joined the Evangelist group and works with AMQ and Fuse. So Christina and I do a lot with the integration product line. And so you'll notice I have up on the screen the presentation that's out on SpeakerDeck, on speakerdeck.com/kpeoples. And we're going to go through this presentation, and I wanted you to be able to have the link. Let me copy that over into our chat so that you can have that. So what we're going to do is go through this presentation, excuse me, and then you'll have about an hour or so to do the lab on your own, and of course ask me questions. We want to make sure we improve this workshop for everybody so that the people can go through Fuse ServiceWorks and learn and gain knowledge about the capabilities and features of Switchyard, DTGov, RTGov, SRAMP. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's see. And for those that joined the data virtualization workshop and now the Fuse ServiceWorks workshop, thanks for joining again. Okay, so let's go to the agenda. So if you were in the data virtualization workshop, this is similar. We're going to review workshop material, about 10 minutes. We're going to review Fuse ServiceWorks just real briefly, most 10 minutes. And we're going to review the setup. I'm trying to make sure that we move into Docker images so that we can layer demos on top of those. And so this lab is something that Keith Babbo and I did at Summit. And we're trying to, or at least I'm trying to get the Docker image ready so that it matches the environment that we had at Summit, and then make sure that the RTGov portion is there as well. And I'll touch on that briefly in a moment. Then we're gonna, as I said, you'll have about an hour or so for the hands-on lab, and I'll be available for any questions at any time through Blue Jeans. Even afterwards, you can email me. I'm kpeoples on IRC. I have ossmentor.com to do my blogging. So please reach out to me if you have any questions, any feedback on the workshop, on improving it, making it better for everybody. If there's any errors or anything's hard or not working, I want to make sure that we improve that. All right, so the expectation for the workshop, I mentioned this in the last workshop as well. So just to set those expectations, I wanted to say what the workshop is and what it's not, just so people understand what's supposed to happen in the workshop to get everybody on the same page. So the workshop is supposed to be a step-by-step guide to building a home loan demo. It's intended to show the capabilities of Fuse ServiceWorks Server and Designer. So it is a work in progress. I'm not going to say that there aren't any issues at all. We may run across one, but I don't think you will. But it is work in process. And one of the things I mean by that, the lab 1 with Switchyard, the lab 2 with DTGov, those are pretty stable because we were able to spend a lot of time on those. with Lab 3 and RTGov. The Lab 3 is there, should be pretty stable, but I've been trying to get the time to change or upgrade that to the home loan application as well. Right now it revolves around quick starts. So like I say, it's a work in progress, but I think you'll get a lot out of the labs and the way that we have it set up. It is a hands-on workshop, so I'm going to help you get started with the environment. And then after that, and after we're done with the presentation, it's up to you to go through the workshop on your local system and finish at home or office, because you may not finish, and then ping me back with questions or enter issues out on the GitHub repo. And so the workshop is not a 5-minute guide to Fuse ServiceWorks. There are multiple labs, a lot to do within those labs, and it's intended to showcase the home loan demo after each lab and what's happening within that component of Fuse ServiceWorks. So it's not like a 5-minute tutorial or here's this workshop, demo. It's intended to go step by step, so at the end of each lab, you've accomplished what you need to on the home loan demo for that piece. And so if you have any issues, please update the GitHub repo, which is jboss-switchyard/learning/issues. Within that repo, there's the Summit 2013, Summit 2014, and the original one was mainly Switchyard, and this year's was the Switchyard DTGov and RTGov. And so we want to continue to improve that. And so hopefully add some more layers, some more demos on top of the workshop, not just the home loan. So just to cover some of the integration product line and the differences, I don't want to dive too deep into this, but a lot of times we get asked, well, you have this integration product line, and it seems like some of it's duplication. But it's not really duplication, because it's more of adding features as you and capabilities as you move up the product line. And what I mean by that, if you start with AMQ, which is there for messaging and integrates the applications by notification or exchange of data, that's the starting point there for messaging. Then you can move up to Fuse, and that contains the Fuse ESB as well as the messaging, the AMQ piece. So the service bus mediate, transform, and route between loosely coupled components and services with enterprise integration patterns. And then if you move up for more features, more capabilities, and move into Fuse ServiceWorks, you have the service governance, the orchestration, and the structured development, as well as the Fuse ESB and AMQ for messaging. And that's the service and integration platform. So I just wanted to include this slide just to show the progression of adding additional capabilities and functions through the integration product line. So this slide I wanted to show for the multiple connectivity options. So when we talk about data virtualization, Fuse ServiceWorks, Fuse, and AMQ, using those products in the integration product line, you have the multiple connectivity options and a connected enterprise. So you can easily connect your enterprise assets in open standard way, connect and grow innovation faster, connect in an open way, connect enterprise with JBoss middleware, and of course over 150 connectors such as SAP, Salesforce, social and cloud connectivity. Okay, so I wanted to show the components real quick for Fuse Service Works, and going through the lab, you'll see those further in detail. But of course, we have our Apache Camel, our Switchyard, our Overlord with Runtime Governance, Design Time Governance, and SRAM. So just briefly, the structured service development with Switchyard is a lightweight SCA, Service Component Architecture-based structured service development framework. You can design, code, test at higher service abstraction, store and reuse business services. It's a shared repository, easily call BPMN-based BPM processes. The visual tooling, the model is the application. So when we're working in Designer on the application, you can see that visually with the Switchyard Designer. Then RTGov is the operational infrastructure, user IP and visual dashboard. Monitor, capture, correlate, analyze, alter transactions spanning multiple services and systems. Gross service equality, SLA enforcement, alerting, and real-time transaction monitoring, as well as realize IT agility, and RTGov, independent manage SLA and runtime policy from service definition. And you can increase the operational visibility. You can identify precisely where, why, and how transactions are delayed by track SLA violations. Understand and measure the operational efficiency and long-term storage of operational data to support analysis and optimization. So then going on to the design time governance or service lifecycle management, you have the service component and artifact registry and SRAM. You can store, share services policies across the teams. And there are team notifications on content changes. You can track and visualize the artifact relationships, and you can impact the discovery and analysis of the service lifecycle management. And you have the web and CLI tools to simplify the search and reporting of those services. So let's go. Okay. So this is what we're going to be working on in the workshop, the home loan application. And this is what it's going to look like when you're done within the Switchyard Designer, within JBoss Developer Studio. And keep in mind, when you start the Lab 1, which is Switchyard, it's not going to look exactly like this, because you're going to be making some changes, and this is the end result for the working application. So just to make sure that you're aware. So the workshop material. Out on the GitHub repo under the jboss-switchyard/learning, under Summit 2014, you have guides, Lab 1, Lab 2, Lab 3, and support. The guides contain the PDFs as well as the source documents, but they do contain the PDFs. Lab 1 is the Switchyard application. Lab 2 is the Design Time Governance Lab. Lab 3 is the Runtime Governance Lab. And then support contains files such as settings.xml and the customer database, so that you can copy it over into Fuse Service Works instead of creating that. There's a standalone XML, so you can see the changes required there for the database. So that's the workshop material that you'll be working with. So this lab, like I said, was originally done earlier in the year at Red Hat Summit in San Francisco. And in that environment, the laptops in the lab were already set up with the development environment. It already had JBoss Developer Studio, the data virtualization server, all of the lab material on the laptop. So the whole environment was already set up for you. And then you just started with the lab introduction and then lab one. So what I'm trying to do now is create the full Docker image. Right now, the image that we have does not have the complete setup with the database and the JMS queue and so forth. But we want to get that into the Docker image. But the one that we have now is View Service Works. So it can be used, and you just have to connect to it and make those updates to the configuration. And I have on option one using the simplified template that I have with an automated script. So you can use that to get started quickly too. So I'm going to go through some of those configuration options real quick for you. And then as you get started, you can set up that environment and let me know if you have any issues or problems. And after we go through the lab introduction, because there's some things that gotchas that I need to tell you, you'll be able to go through lab 1, 2, and 3. Excuse me. Let me see if we have any questions real quick. I'm just talking away. And no, we don't have any questions. Good. Okay, let me jump back over real quick. What I want to do, let's jump down here where we just were. I'm just going to copy in GitHub repo in the chat as well, real quick. All right. So let's. Awesome. Okay. So let's keep going. All right, so option one. So I created a simplified View Service Works template with an automated script. So when you go through the View Service Works install with the GUI, at the end it asks if you want to save the script definition so that you can rerun it later. And so I created a template where it'll use an automated script. And so you can change that XML file to add and remove components, but also so that it will allow you to do the install step, and you can do steps that can be performed before the install as well as after the install, so that I could build some demos with that and easily deploy those and show those. But with Docker now, I'll probably go more in lines with using the Docker images and layer and linking demos there. But for this workshop for now, I'm going to run through the steps of using these two options. And then you can get that environment set up and then get started on the lab. So first you clone the repository. And I have the URL there for the simplified template that will have everything that you need once you clone it. Then you just copy over into the distros folder the View Service Works installer. And then you can modify the install script for the install path that you see in step 4. And tell it where you want the install to take place. And the way that I have it set up with the simplified View Service Works template, so when you clone the repo, you're going to clone it in a specific directory. So within that directory or folder structure, within the simplified View Service Works template, there's an installed directory and a View Service Works directory. And so if you change that install path to have that root portion, then it'll do the install in that directory, the installed FSW directory where you've done the clone. And then after you do that, you can run the install-run.sh script that will do the install for you. Now, I commented out for it to start View Service Works right after it does the install, so that you can go in and do the configuration that's necessary for the home loan demo that you build in Lab 1. So within View Service Works, once you install it, you want to do the configuration. And you can do that one of two ways. I went ahead and included the manual way, just in case people would rather do that instead of copying what I had for the customer database. But you should be able to copy the customer database files that are over in what you've cloned in the Git repo, or you can just go through it manual and connect to H2. We're using H2, which made it easier, but you could change it later on if you wanted. Excuse me, right now I'm not going to try and change it. But this is showing you how to connect to the H2 console. And then once you connect, you can create the table and insert some customer data. So of course, if you copy over that customer database that's in the repo, you shouldn't have to do that manual way. And then this is, there is an example copy of the standalone.xml in the support folder. But this is really what you need to add, and that is the reference, the customer data source, to reference the database that you'll be using in the Switchyard application in Lab 1. So you also have to set up the JMS queue. And these are the steps to go through there with adding the user and then creating the JMS queue that you'll need for the Switchyard application. And like I say, these steps of creating the database and creating the queue, I want to get those into the Docker image. It's just I haven't had time to finish that yet. Now, one of the things with View Service Works that, and this was nice at the lab at Summit, we actually copied the View Service Works Maven repo and the EAP Maven repos local, so it could be the offline repos, and that worked out better than the online. But there is the settings.xml that you can grab, and it has the references for the online repo and the SRAMP username and password that you can are going to use in the lab. So make sure you make a backup of your settings.xml before you copy over the new one, just in case you need to go back. And so trying to think, I think out, I'll have to check. I wanted to make sure we included the online and offline one out on the repo. Like I say, it was nice having at Summit all of those Maven repos local. But of course, then you're talking, I think it was 4 gig or so or more, whatever it was, with all those Maven repos. So creating a Docker container that has that would be a lot. I think, to do, but please give me some feedback on that. So then let's go to option 2, which is the Docker file. So I did create a Docker image and put it out on Google Drive. So you could actually go to Google Drive, download that Docker image, and do a Docker load from the tar file, and then you would have a base Docker image to work with View Service Works. And the same thing here, you can go to JBoss Docker files, where I'm adding product Docker files, and you can actually do the build of the Docker image. And you could actually, if you wanted, within that Docker file, you could go ahead and add in creating the JMS queue and creating the database. I just haven't had time. But for now, at least there's a base that you can start with. And when you start with that Docker image, then you would just have to connect to it, attach to it with the shell, and do those configuration settings. All right, so just to run through this quickly, and this is similar to what we talked about with, and I do have a mistake on my slide here, and I'm going to go back and fix that. So the Docker setup, step 1, install Docker. The instructions are at docs.docker.com. You start your Docker daemon. You may run into an operation error on docker.sock, an operation not permitted. You can do that change, and I need to find out why that occurs. And then you can verify Docker's running. And so you can either use that tar image, download it, or you can do the Docker build from the repo. And of course, if you use the Docker build, then you need to download View Service Works, put it in the software directory. And step 7 and 8, I apologize, I meant to change that, has JBoss DV 600. It should be JBoss FSW 600 for those. So then step 9, so even though you have that Docker image, until we change the Docker file, you have to go in and do those configuration steps, as in option 1, where you create the database, create the queue, and make sure the View Service Works server has the data source entry. And then you can start up View Service Works in the container, and you can get the IP address and make sure that you can browse to View Service Works. And these are just additional commands. Since I'm messing around with Docker more and trying to create these images for the integration products, I'm trying to do some saving of images, loading, stopping the containers, and then deleting some of the containers or all of them and the images if I just want to start over. So a couple of notes around Docker here. If you use Docker with the labs, it impacts Relay Lab 2 because you have to make sure that SRAMP is pointing to, you have to make sure that within Maven for your application that it's pointing to the SRAMP repository in Docker. So when you do the deploy to DTGov SRAMP to kick off the workflow, it goes to the one within Docker. And also, if you're doing more within JBDS, then and you want to set up that remote connection, you have to do it similar to what we did in data virtualization, because before it goes on to let you add a server and remotely connect to it, it expects a local configuration. So you have to kind of trick JBDS to say, okay, here's the local configuration, but after that screen, then you set up the remote connection to View Service Works over in the container. And so after you do those two options, or one of those two options, whether you use the simplified script to set up Fuse Service Works, or whether you use the Docker container, you still need to set up JBoss Developer Studio and add the tools, the integration stack. Within the data virtualization setup or documentation that we have for the workshop, that guides you through setting that up, and I can point you to those instructions. We didn't put that within this workshop because it was something that was already set up, but I will be adding more specific setup guide for JBDS, but hopefully that'll be within the Docker image. Out on Fedora Cloud, there is a Firefox example of a Docker image. So you use VNC to connect to the Docker container and run Firefox within the container. And we want to make sure we do JBoss Developer Studio like that too eventually, so that within the Docker container you have everything you need and you don't have to do any additional setup. But if you need help there, let me know and I'll be glad to help you. Out on jboss.org/products. It has the getting started guides for those. But again, I can point you to the DV workshop where it walks you through that, or I can help you as well. All right, so now what we're going to do, I want to check and see if we have any questions. But we're going to spend a little time going through the lab introduction guide. And that just kind of describes the layout of the lab with the guides and some of the gotchas that you'll run into. And then you can get started with the lab. So let's check. Oh, there is a question. Okay, so there was a question about adding the GitHub links for Docker as well. So let's see, where was that? Let's see. So why don't I do this? All right, so this first link is the simplified template. And then for the second option for Docker, what I want to do, oops. Bear with me, it's giving me a little bit of trouble here. So that's the Docker file for Fuse Service Works. This should be the Tara image, and you can do a Docker load. And if you want me to show you that, I can. And then, so those two. So there was one other one I wanted to show you. Okay, so so that should help there. Okay. Now what I want to do, I'll close some of these windows. Oh, I wanted to include this one. So this other one that I am putting out here, yeah, Robbie, I guess you can do that Docker import. I was doing a load, but both of those should work So what I also wanted to include is this is the Fedora Docker files repository. And within there, the Firefox Docker file is included. And that's what I was mentioning, where we wanted to put JBoss Developer Studio within the container. And then you can just VNC to it, and everything is within the image. And yeah, I'm glad to see. So Ravi, I know you're doing that Docker import, and thanks for posting that as well. So if you see any issues with that when you're doing that, let me know. I'm glad to see someone testing that out in addition to myself. So let's see here. So what I want to do now, sorry guys, just bear with me a minute. Awesome. Thanks, Ravi. I'm glad it imported. Good. Okay, so let's go on to, and please keep in mind those that are working with the Docker versus just having it all locally. When you go through the DTGov portion, that you're pointing the Maven POM where it has the distribution management, and it's pointing to the container SRAMP repository. And if you need help there, then just let me know when you get to that portion. All right, so let's see if I can pull this up here. Okay. All right, awesome. Let's come over here. So what I wanted to do is, I know you can read through this lab introduction on your own, but I wanted to go through this lab introduction with you first, and then you can do the environment and get started with lab 1. So this is an introduction to the lab. And let's see. So I wanted to go through the lab structure real quick. Oops. So I wanted to go through the, sorry about that. So I wanted to go through this lab structure a little bit. We touched on it briefly. And then after we go through the lab structure, there's a couple of gotchas, and that's mainly why I wanted to go through this intro, because you have to keep these gotchas in mind when you're going through the workshop, or you may get stuck or think something's actually wrong when it's not. All right. So this lab schedule is from when we had it at Summit, but don't worry about that. What we're concerned with, and the lab schedule, of course, is similar to what we're doing now, is what we did then, with the exception of trying to get the environment set up. Of course, since it's virtual, it makes it a little bit harder. But with the lab walkthrough, get your lab on in the Q&A. So, yeah, I could page it, but oh well. So there's a couple of things that I wanted to show you as you're going through lab 1, 2, and 3. And I can't take credit for this format. Keith Babbitt did a really good job, so I have to do a shout out to him. that he created this lab key. There's a to-do. So when you see a to-do, it's actually a to-do list and defines task that you'll be performing in the lab. And so when you see that on a slide, you need to make sure that you do that in order to progress, or things won't progress properly. And make sure that you follow each of those steps. So the other key is the FYI notes. So you'll see those on the slides as well. And it just provides additional background information. So one of the things I wanted to comment on, Lab 1 and Lab 2, Switchyard DT Gov, they're pretty solid labs, meaning they are walking you through everything with home loan, the home loan demo. With Lab 3, the RT Gov, it's giving you more overview of RT Gov. I'm in the process of making sure that it has the links and what it needs within the home loan application for RT Gov. So there'll be another update on Lab 3 portion soon. But the Lab 3 is still solid. It's just giving you more of an overview and a little bit of a quick starts there. So then the lab guide example, this is just showing what one of the slides will look at like during the lab, that shows FYI. And this is talking about the credit service beam. So you can reveal the implementation for any component in your application by double-clicking on the component in the editor, just showing you an FYI. And the to-do would be double-click on the credit component to see the implementation we just added. So that's just an example there. So Lab 1, we talked about, that's Switchyard. So get familiar with the development environment, application design, and implementation. Hands-on experience with important Switchyard principles. So Lab 2, and I may be going too fast for what it can. Yeah, it seems like there's a delay there. So you may be seeing on the slide, it may be delayed from showing the new slide I'm talking about, just from the internet connectivity. So sorry about that, but you can, like I say, this lab intro is in the GitHub repo, so if you have to go back and refer to it, you can. So Lab 2 is Design Time Governance. So you gain experience with the service governance workflow in FSW. You become familiar with the Design Time Governance and SRAMP consoles, and you manage the service through the dev, QA stage, and production task. So one of the things with that, it should be within the Lab 2. Keep in mind with the Design Time Governance, the goal of that lab is in Lab 1, you create the Switchyard application. In Lab 2, you're going to deploy it to Design Time Governance and SRAMP with the distribution management. It's going to go into dev. But you want it to hit the Fuse Service Works server when it gets to production. So normally you would have, in this case, you would have 4 server instances that represent each stage, dev, QA stage, and production. But with our workshop, we don't want to have 4 instances running. Yes, you could, especially with doing Docker. But we just wanted to use the file copy within the Design Time Governance so that when it hits production, and that means when it's been completed and passed in stage, that the application actually is deployed to the Fuse Service Works server. So then you're going to learn service lifecycle management principles. And then lab 3, as I mentioned, that's the runtime governance. And you gain experience with the runtime governance capabilities and FSW. You become familiar with service activity monitoring and reporting, and you become familiar with policy enforcement. So as I said before, the Lab 3 is there. It gets you familiar with these concepts, and hopefully soon we'll have the updates where it has the hooks for RT-Gov within the home loan application. One of the things with the runtime governance at this point, there is more low-level changes, additions that you do have to do. So I'm going to change that Lab 3 to explain that in more detail with the home loan as the example. All right, so gotchas. Make sure we hit these gotchas. So the first gotcha, when you import Lab 1, you will see errors, warnings when you open that up. And of course, don't get concerned. And you're not seeing this slide yet. It's still stuck on Lab. Oh, there it goes. It's just a little bit of a delay. So fear not, the errors exist because the project's not complete. One of the things, so we're going through a workshop less than 2 hours. And of course, with Summit, the environment was already there. And this one, we're setting it up. And I wish I was there with everybody so I could give you a flash drive. But anyway, so the 2 hours and trying to do the 3 labs and set up and all takes a little bit of time. So one of the things that we decided to do was have a Switchyard application that the basics were there, but the lab walked you through adding some of the project to it, or some of the pieces to it. And that's why I showed you the end result of the Switchyard Designer and what it's supposed to look like, because initially it's not going to look like that. When you finished, it will. So the second gotcha. So when you browse for an interface, it will have a slight lag as the editor searches in Maven. The Maven repository. It will happen once at the beginning of the lab, and you shouldn't see it again. But since we're using a different environment than what we used before, you'll have to let me know if there's any issues there. When this is done, you'll be able to search for interfaces by entering text. You'll see what I'm talking about when you're going through the lab. Let's see. Did that come through? Yeah, it's kind of, slides are kind of behind. I think. No, there you go. Okay. It's about 1 a.m. here, so I might be a little slow, everybody, so you'll have to pardon me. I may be the one slow instead of the internet connection. So with our gotchas, the next one is the Eclipse will incorrectly report the schema validation errors unless you disable honor all XML schema locations in the editor's preference. And so once you install JBDS, you add the integration stack. Go ahead and go into the preferences. And it's under XML, XML files, and then validation. And uncheck that honor all XML schema locations so you won't see all of those. All right, so the next error, so when you get into Lab 2 with the design time governance, when you deploy the application to the design time repository, you're going to see an exception on the server log related to SMTP if you're looking at the server log. And the reason that's there is it tries to do a notification. Of course, there's not an SMTP server set up. But it can be safely ignored as, of course, SMTP and mail account are not configured for the lab. Of course, you can try and set it up, but oops. So that was the lab walkthrough. And so it's go time. Everybody gets to go have fun with Fuse Service Works. And I'm going to have a couple of more Red Bull or Monster Energy drinks so I can make sure everybody's having a great time. So if you will, I have the notes on the presentation. Get that from Speaker Deck. Get your environment set up. Then start going through the lab guides 1, 2, and 3, which are PDFs. That's in the GitHub repo for the workshop. And then please, if you have any feedback or you see any issues, of course, email me or message me now. I'll be here for an hour or maybe 55 minutes because we want to make sure the next person gets started good. I believe Eric Chabel's up next. But please go into the GitHub repo on issues and add any issues that you see or that you run across. Hopefully everything that we ran into at Summit was updated in the repo. But just in case we missed anything, please add any issues by going to the GitHub repo and creating a new issue. I would appreciate that. And of course, any feedback, anything on improving the Docker file or the workshop, please add that as well, because we really want to get the collateral out for everybody to get familiar with Fuse Service Works and create more demos and enable everybody in the field, the SAs, the consultants, our partners. So please give me as much feedback as possible. So at this point, I really hadn't planned on going into anything else. What I'm going to do is be available and give everything a try. If you're still working on it after the next hour, email me, IRC me, and we'll make sure that I get things resolved for you. And I'm going to check in every couple of minutes, maybe every 10 minutes or something, 5 to 10 minutes, just to see if anybody has any issues they want to post on the Blue Jeans chat window. It would have been nice. Should have added like a shock button. Since it's getting late here, I'm gonna try not to doze off. You guys need a shock button so you can shock me if I happen to doze off. And I wanted to give you guys or everybody everybody on the that's joined us. Thank you for attending. We have about 21 people on. Actually, I guess one would be me and one would be the moderator. So we have about 19 people in the workshop. So thanks everybody for joining. Thanks, Ravi. So if you're trying to use the Docker tar file, Ravi's posted the Docker load there, and that's I'm pretty sure that's the same command that I used when I tested that. Yep. And the Docker load command is not in the presentation. And thanks, Ravi, for posting those. Doing the Docker run and the bash script, I'm pretty sure I put that in the presentation. But yeah, and thanks for doing that, Ravi. If you come across some more as you're doing the workshop that you want to share, please post those in there for to share with everybody. So just in case anybody's watching, I made that modification where I had an error on the presentation. I'm putting it back out on speaker deck. And also, let's see, I believe I said to make sure of this. So actually, I don't think let me see if I brought that up. I may have left that off. Okay. Yeah, so one thing to note, and I didn't do this earlier, and I should have put it as one of the gotchas. So when you go through the labs, like I said, there was a specific environment that had been set up. So you may notice within the lab guides references to /home/lab10, because that lab 10 was the user. And then with the location of the lab projects, the source code, it had a /home/lab10/desktop/lab guides, because that's where the repo had been cloned on that environment. So of course you would have to change those to the necessary directories for your environment when you're going through the labs. But I just wanted to mention that, and I'm sure everyone's figured it out, but just thought I would mention that. And then I'm pretty sure that all the labs mention when needed the username and password. But for management, it's the admin and Red Hat 1 exclamation. And for Overlord, the DTGov, RTGov, SRAMP, it's FSW with a capital A, then DMIN, FSW admin, with Red Hat 1 exclamation. Can't find the customer DB files and support folder. Let me look at that real quick. It should be, unless... So there's a customer.h2.db and customer.trace.db. Those are the customer DB files that go over and and the standalone data H2 directory. Oh, thanks, Ravi. So that run.sh script, that Docker image must have gotten created. It still points to DV. Let me check the Docker file real quick. It may have gotten changed after that image was created. Thanks for denoting that, Ravi. If it's not changed, I'll fix it real quick. Let's see here. Yeah, let's see. I do see one thing that needs to change on that Docker file. Let's see. Let's see. Yeah, yeah. All right, I see the issue there. Thanks, Ravi, for pointing that out. I see a couple of things in the Docker file for FSW that need updating. Thanks, Ravi. I made that change on the Docker file. So everybody, if anyone's using the Docker file, the tar image, and even if you have created your own Docker image from the Docker file, I had to change the run.sh that Ravi indicates in the chat message panel. There was a reference to DV that should have been FSW. So I've changed it in the Docker file. So in your image, you have to change the run.sh to use FSW instead of DV. And Ravi, if I was there, I would buy you a drink or something. So probably what I'll do, I'll fix the Docker file and I'll update the Docker tar image probably in the morning. Well, I guess I could go ahead. How much time? Yeah. So I probably would be able to, I'll probably wait until morning. So just a quick note to everybody, when you're going through Lab 1, there are a number of unit test cases or unit tests that you'll be running after you go through the to-do list, which indicates success or failure of your changes. And so the intention there was to show how you can run those test cases within the environment to show whether the services are working or not. And so within the guide, you'll see those sections that say, okay, run this test case, and was it successful or not? And if you're making the appropriate changes, you'll get the successful unit test run. So let's see, I thought I put so the one that you're going to want to use is the, I'll check real quick, and I thought there was only one in there. The settings.xml file that you want to use is the one that's pointing to the online repo. Since in your environment, I'm sure you don't have all of the Maven repos locally. So there should be a settings.xml that contains the online repo reference, as well as the SRAMP username and password. So let me look real quick. I thought there was only one in there. Okay, so Thanks for asking that question. I'm looking over the settings.xml now. So the settings.xml that's under the Summit 2014 support, that settings.xml was for that local environment for Summit. If you'll notice, it has EAP repos and GA repo, and they're all local under home Peeples. When that was being tested, and they have the server username and password. So yeah, there you go. The settings.xml under the simplified FSW template, that one should contain the online repo and the SRAMP server ID and username and password. Now, let me check that, but yeah, that's it. So if you'll notice, that should have the GA repo and the ID, username, and password for the server. Thanks for pointing that out. And probably what I will do is under that Summit 2014, because we're going to eventually move that to another location, but probably what I'll do, instead of a settings.xml, do like a offline settings.xml and an online settings.xml to kind of call that out better. Let me show you that real quick. So you want to make sure to add the integration stack. I can copy that link for you. So you want to make sure in your JBoss Developer Studio that you've added the SOA tools, the Switchyard Designer. So so it should be under our integration stack. So you should have JBoss integration and SOA development. And you should install everything there. Awesome. Okay, so for those that are just maybe just now joining, we went through the introduction. We went through the options for the environment, and everybody's working on the workshop by going through the guides and following the task and reading the FYIs. Under each guide. And so I believe it'll be about 20 minutes. So so let's see, let me go back up and make sure I get. So Eric, I don't know if you can hear me now, but so what we did is the first hour. All right, so hopefully, let's see. So we still had another 20 minutes before the next lab. So Eric was asking if I was speaking. So what we did in this lab, we spent the first hour going through the overview, going through the environment setup, going through what was required for the lab. And then everyone started working on the lab itself. And so then the next question was, JBDS 7 and 8, do I really need 7.1? Let's say 7 and 8 should work as long as you have the integration stack in them. And then can FSW orchestrate a mix of REST and SOAP services? Yes. Okay, so we have some more people joining us now. So Eric's session will start in about 20 minutes. For those that may have just joined us for that session, we're still working on the Few Service Works lab. And so we spent the first hour going through everything. And the second hour, everybody is working on the lab since it is a hands-on lab and going through step by step through the lab guides. So there may be times where nothing's being said, and that's just because people are working on the labs. So we are getting close to the end of the session, a little bit longer. I know people are still going through the lab guides, and the intent was that you went through step by step the lab guides, and if you didn't finish, then try at home or office or whatever later on. And if you do that and you have any issues, then please send me an email or catch me on IRC or on the GitHub repo. Just create an issue and I'll make sure I address it. And also with the Docker file and Docker image, I really like the capability that gives us. And we have that with the data virtualization workshop and the Few Service Works workshop, but the Few Service Works Docker file, I haven't had as much time to spend with it. So any suggestions on improving that Docker image, then please let me know. And in the future, we'll be creating more images and linking to them so that we can layer and link additional demos together. So I think the storm here is passed over. I know everybody was hearing thundering and a storm earlier, so it has passed. So what I'm going to do now, we have, it's getting around less than 15 minutes. I'm going to grab a drink of water real quick and then check and see if there are any additional questions. And then we'll close out and Eric can pick up on his session. So I'll be back in just a couple of minutes. All right, so I hope everybody's going through the guide okay. Probably going to take questions over the next 5 minutes and then close us out so Eric can get started by 2. And it's almost 2 a.m. here, so I'm ready to close out the evening. So I'll stay on another 5 minutes, and please, any feedback that you have, good or bad, around the workshop, presentation style, anything, please shoot me an email. Because as evangelists, we always want to improve on our content as well as our delivery. So any suggestions, comments, feedback are always welcome. I really do appreciate everybody joining us for the data virtualization workshop and the Fuse Service Works workshop. Hopefully everybody has been able to get through them okay. It seems like it from the questions that were asked, people were making progress. So I know this was a little different, being workshops in a virtual environment instead of being physically there to ask questions and to see how everybody is doing. So I appreciate everyone sticking with us with the workshops in the virtual environment. You're welcome. Thanks, Brian. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Ravi. Anytime. I've really enjoyed the tech exchange. Thanks, Bhupesh. Thanks, Simon. Thanks, Eric. Do you really mean that? I don't think you really mean that. I love being somebody's hero. But yeah, I expect hugs next time we're in the same country. I really do love the Docker approach too, and I've been trying to work more with it and talk with the PMMs and PMs more about it, with being able to have base images and layer link additional demos and make it easier to run the demos and show them. And hopefully soon we'll be able to deploy the containers to OpenShift as well. Yeah, Simon, that sounds great. Having the reusable DV demo with different industry aligned demo data sets, yeah, that would be great. I'd love to hear more about that. So maybe I can send you an email sometime, and you can describe that more to me, because I think everyone would get a lot of reuse out of that. And there are, with the TID out on the community site, there is there are a lot of samples of data that have been built up, and some of that can be used. But it would be nice to get more of the data and more recent data that could be used. Yeah, I would love to hear about that data-oriented partner. So it's about 1:55, and yeah, I would love to organize a hookup. It's about 1:55 a.m. and I don't know if people want to take a couple of minute break before Eric gets started, or if Eric wants to go ahead and get started. Yeah, and I'll look more at the instructions for different OS users. But Eric, I'll go ahead and sign off now. And thanks everybody for joining. I enjoyed it. I hope everybody has a good day. And I'll turn it over to Eric. Thanks so much, everybody.